Social media can be such a force for good when used in the right way. For me, growing up in the Midwest, I'm from Kansas, I felt like I was very isolated from a lot of my family members. I used to go to summer camp. I could never really see my camp friends during the year. So social media was really like my existence. But I think over time and over my entire life, I've seen it evolve in ways that have been very destructive that I know we have talked about a lot. I'm excited to kind of get into the ins and outs of really where our generation can hopefully move the needle when it's a tool that we have grown up with, but also is one that hopefully we can have some agency in. I'd love to kind of kick us off by diving into today's topic. We're here to discuss all things social media. So without going into a lot of length about your perspective, I just want us to go down the line with a quick yes or no to this question. Should the government regulate social media?
Yes. I say no.
Yes.
Yes.
I definitely am at a yes or no, but my gut says no. What about your personal experience colors this answer for you, and why did you say yes or no?
I think it's really interesting because I studied journalism, and so I am very much like free speech, importance of the press, importance of marketplace of ideas, being able to speak out, etc. Anyone can use these platforms and has the potential to reach millions or billions of people. We've seen harmful content allowed to be put out that has led to actual harm in the real world, whether it's individuals or at large, influencing things like election and policy and things that can, again, have like mass repercussions, good or bad. How we've operated as a country has never been that you can just simply do whatever you want. I think if we were all, morally perfect humans, we would be responsible with all of those things. But like, that's simply just like society. If we were all morally good people, like we wouldn't need laws. I think there needs to be rules and regulation across the sector so that people don't abuse, and also so that everyone's on the same standard.
If I actually build on this a little bit, this is the interesting thing about, I feel like, yes or no, because I'm also yes, but I think we disagree on why. There's sort of like two framing thoughts I have on this. One is, what's scary about the current moment is we're talking about social media, and we haven't figured out social media, and now AI has already come, hitting not only how we effectively engage and communicate, but it's going to, I think, totally revolutionize. If social media was like this tiny little rock that hit planet Earth, I think AI is going to be a meteor. And what's sad about this moment is that we're focused on this technology that was invented 20 years ago, and we still can't figure it out. And now we're talking about AI. So that's one thought I have on this. The second one is, what's interesting about social media and regulation is, I think, to your point, Annie, social media is this tool that has real public impact. And any tool you look at in the history of sort of American society that has public impact, whether it's your car, seatbelts, smoking, electricity outlets, this building, anything that has public impact is regulated. Where I think you and I probably disagree a little bit is that while it should be regulated, I don't think the content should be regulated. I think what should be regulated is the liability that platforms have for what happens. Because I think it's very difficult to draw bright lines of what is permissible and what's not. But I think what's easier is if we can actually assign real liability risk to what happens from a platform, so that they're not just open platforms. And that's where I think like a lot of the Section 230 reforms come in, and that's where I can just nerd out, but I won't. But yeah, that's how I think about it.
It's interesting thinking about content
regulation
versus platform liability, algorithmic regulation potentially. Gabby, what's your take?
Like, I just don't trust current administrations to do regulation that we need. Like, I totally hear what you guys are saying, and I think that like some regulations, whether it be accountability and like liability, or whether it be like content itself, are all like great ideas within like an idealistic realm. Currently, we've heard arguments saying that like TikTok bans need to happen to protect like children and to protect what content's being put out. Like, if those were the real things that are like an agenda focused forward, like, why aren't we protecting children when we have gun rates going up and like kind of like shootings in America being the #1 cause of death for children? Why don't we have regulations when it comes to like climate change and corporations and what like their accountabilities are for that? Like, I feel like there are different perspectives that need to have like more attention on this, and more specifically like when it comes to like the state of Florida, we already have that. We already have a TikTok ban on any public university. There are kids who are facing the repercussions also of HB 999, which is like the DEI ban on programs and any curriculum, courses, or majors related to DEI. And that DEI umbrella extends all the way from like women and gender studies all the way to bioethic classes. And I'm thinking about like the accessibility that social media provides in instances like that. At the end of the day, we have people who can't access information if we have these regulations.
So I think the internet democratized a lot of access to information and things like that. I think I am more on the realm of like it's the sector, and it's not just social media, and it's not just TikTok. And I think like when we get down to like what's currently happening, it's really targeted. I'm very much like this is a much more nuanced, larger conversation and issue than just like a single platform app. A specific side's agenda is like very much not in the root of like the actual problems.
Moralistically, social media has so much value in democratizing information, making sure people who never have access to specific things then get those opportunities through, you know, interacting with people all around the world. I don't know many cultural references. I struggle sometimes to get through the day. I don't know how trains in America work. The Amtrak system, ridiculous. It confuses me, but, you know, I can look that up. I can contact my friends on Instagram, be like, how do you use this train? And that's an amazing resource that's just freely available to anybody, anywhere, as long as they have like, a stable internet connection. However, there is the idea that like because somebody is behind the screen, a lot of people feel this sense of safety where they're not being held directly liable. Their information can still be easily found. We've seen it happen. Like there are videos of racist attacks, and then people will find this person's entire life story, their family, their university, and get them fired from jobs, as they should be. But there's also the idea that people behind the screen feel as if they are safe from that, and that they can do things which they normally would never be able to do in real life.
Again, who is responsible for the regulation of these platforms? And I think after hearing your perspectives around whether you think the government should regulate or not, my question is, here in America, obviously our First Amendment rights protect free speech. Does any part of you feel that if the government were to regulate social media, that goes directly against our First Amendment rights?
I feel like establishing like maybe like a common ground for what we're all defining as like regulation may like help, just because like we're hearing about how like there's these huge repercussions if there aren't like any regulations. But like I'm personally thinking right now about like in my home state of Florida, SB 1220 just passed, which is actually this bill that charges journalists with defamation for reporting on altered or unaltered videos, photos, or audio recordings. So basically if there's any sort of article, video that's being reported on that goes against the essential agenda of like the current administration, they can be charged with defamation, and it puts this financial burden on journalists to report on the truth, essentially. And so we're talking about repercussions when there are no regulations, but then when there are regulations, like where do we draw the line of what's too far? Like what is the base common ground for what we should establish as a regulation in our ideal world? Because power is enticing.
Almost every other like westernized country, like excluding the US, like has regulation around what people are able to do with our data and our information they get from harvesting our data, and how they're able to sell it, how they're able to use it. That is then when we see things that like our data was being sold and things with election interference and all of that. And I think like again, people have like the right to privacy. And so where do these things come into play? What we saw with January 6th and that coordination that happened. There was so much evidence online about that being planned. I think that also comes back to like the government like should have seen that stuff online because it was free and available and been prepared for what was going to happen, because there was no, you know, stopping that conversation and that mobilization happening. We need to be putting things that are like sustainable in place so that like if TikTok goes away, if we like get rid of, like, that's why I don't think the TikTok ban is like just this solution. Like it's not a solution. Exactly. You get rid of TikTok, another app can pop up and like another app that's foreign owned. We see what's happening with Twitter right now. We see what's happened in the past with Meta. Like we're not just like this morally superior country of how we use data. We could, right now there's no regulation. They could sell the data back to a company in China. And like that is what we're worried about with the Chinese government having our data from TikTok. We don't have anything to stop people from getting our data. Like, so I think it's just like so much larger than just when we talk about regulation.
I always think of like the internet and the amount of information every single person has on there as like a voodoo doll of sorts, like a digital voodoo doll. People really have so much of your information, all of your browsing history, your credit card information, where you went to school. On LinkedIn, you can find literally the entire life history of somebody.
All my life deets are on LinkedIn.
Exactly, me as well. Me as well. And it's very intense.
All
and
80 of them.
And it's very intense. There needs to be some sort of regulation because companies, again, have no economic incentive to not sell your data. Marketing, sure, but again, election interference or selling data abroad, there's no incentive for them to not do so. And that's what needs to be regulated.
Suhani, this reminds me of a perspective from our community that I want to read out loud. It's kind of funny to me when people get all up in arms about TikTok stealing our data. Like, babe, you have an iPhone and have been using the internet for a decade. Everyone has your data.
It's true.
Like public Wi-Fi's, like all of these things that we log onto and do.
100%.
And I think Gen Z is like aware of that.
Yeah.
Like,
100%.
and I think when people talk about young people in this conversation, everyone knows that our data and like all of our lives has just been like not up to us. And like,
Do you think our generation cares more or less about that from other generations?
I think we're just like, we've accepted
Accepted it.
that. We are so online for our whole lives. Like, we are the only generation that has the digital footprints that we
Yeah.
have. Everyone has more of like a history that you're going to be able to search up.
Exactly.
There's so much more access to people's information because we've just put it out there because we've been on.
The one thing I have to say on the data question is there's a difference between a US company based in Cupertino having all of our data and China. I think that there's a very different sort of risk factor. We were having a briefing from TikTok where we specifically were getting their insight on how they're trying to protect the data and all of that. And I think the biggest challenge here is that we are in a real conflict, and that conflict requires an understanding that one side of the hemisphere where TikTok is only showing content that is pro a certain state, promoting certain lifestyles. The only thing that people that are in 8th grade that can get on TikTok in China is workout videos and scientific experiments. Can you believe that? Whereas in the US, it's a totally different context. And so I think the China piece here is uniquely different on data. To your point, Gabby, we obviously have a different definition of regulation.
Yeah.
I also think the other challenge is each of us have identified different value adds that social media has. Like you mentioned connection and friendship, right? You mentioned the ability for us to meet new people. We also talked about political campaigns. We talked about messaging. The fundamental challenge, and not just this conversation, but the debate on social media, is it's a tool whose purpose we haven't defined. Some folks might use social media because they think that it is their way to meet friends and build relationships. Some people might use it because it allows them to build a platform. Other folks might use it because it allows them to get out of Wichita, Kansas, and be able to connect to the broader world.
Or even just to consume news. Or
So
Yeah,
that's my challenge on this. Is some people it's their news platform. That's the difficulty around this tool. It's what makes it different than like the radio or TV. You could have a regulation that affects speech, but that might not solve the data privacy stuff.
Exactly.
You could have a regulation that affects your ability to reach a lot of people, but that might not affect what you're saying. That's the challenge. I guess that doesn't help the conversation. More is like, this is what makes it difficult.
Don't have a firm definition of social media, but like the people who are in these higher up positions are aware of the power that they have and use it to manipulate whatever agenda they have. We saw that over the summer with the fall of Roe v. Wade and people being sued for trying to access an abortion in a state where there's certain legal ramifications, and Facebook releasing their messenger data. I feel like it shifts based off of like what current climate is politically.
Whether Twitter is owned by Jack or whether Twitter is owned by the Tesla guy, they would still be beholden to these like things of like, you can't just like put hateful whatever.
And that's
That
why-
doesn't make it partisan. It makes it just like how society should operate, just like you couldn't put on like a billboard in New York Times like certain things, I'm assuming.
When I initially answered this question as no, the government should not regulate social media, it's not because I don't want them to. I think it's because realistically, I don't know if they will be able to. But I think what you're bringing up, Manu, that we talk about often, and what scares me about these platforms, the algorithms that are in place that we have become so innately connected to and perceive as reality have actually exacerbated this division. I don't think they're the cause, but the more and more you see ideas and belief systems and things that align with what you love and what you believe in, the more you perceive it as reality. How do you think we straddle this line between who's in charge of creating this solution? I know, Manu, you believe that a lot of it is on us. How do you think we decide where that agency comes in between whether we're responsible to fix the problem based on determining whether a TikTok that comes up in our feed is real or not, or how much of that do we place on larger institutions and public or private companies that really don't have an incentive to regulate these platforms in a more democratic way.
I think something really interesting. So I was reading papers for a class recently, the idea of financial incentives to bring firms and even like something like a union to cooperate with larger regulation and to cooperate with more inclusivity and better societal practices just because they have to after a certain point. Unions in this country first came to accept their first Black members through legal battles and financial ruin. Basically, through these legal battles, they had no other choice but then to accept. Without some sort of regulation, those would have never really happened because those unions themselves were unwilling. It might not be perfect regulation and it might cause a lot of problems. However, there needs to be something to start that movement.
So I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, but I want to bring us back to why we're even calling to regulate social media potentially in the first place. What is it about the idea of regulating or not regulating social media that really gets you going?
When you regulate social media, within that falls this umbrella of accessibility to information, accessibility to education. And for folks who don't have accessibility to higher up education, whether it be for financial reasons, whether it be for like different socioeconomic reasons, we're very much limiting folks who are on the very outside of the margins. I think a lot about how for social media, I start to think about like the dangerous kind of atmospheres and environments that queer folks put themselves in to learn, more so in regards to like the 1980s, and we see a lot of higher ups within like clubbing scenes and kind of just like queer nightlife, which is an amazing part of the community, but it's also a part where a lot of younger folks can get taken advantage of. And I think that social media, and more so like you're saying, like this sector of what the internet can provide, is more of an easy transition into safer methods to learning about the queer community, more about prevention. And when we eliminate that, we have to think about who's being most impacted and what are the results from that. We're eliminating kind of like sexual education, and we're also simultaneously enforcing these social media regulations. What are the environments that these folks are going to find themselves in, and like what's the outcome of that?
Do you think on the other side though, if we put different rules or regulations in place, it could help from the suppression of marginalized voices? Because I think that's one of the issues that I see and I've seen in my work in social media or talking to other people. There are certain issues, or you think about how on TikTok people use like TikTok
Language.
Texting language, like because certain issues and conversations and voices and people are suppressed.
I think that there's like this coexistence of where we can find a solution, but I don't think that solution is going to come from the current administration because they're actively legislating against that.
The scary thing here always is making decisions based on a specific agenda. I was a freshman and we just built like our first little like Bridge Berkeley chapter, right? And like we started having this conversation, and then the next day we were in a conversation with this guy named Ira Glasser. And Ira, he ran the ACLU in the 60s. And the ACLU at that time in the 60s had defended this Nazi march through Skokie, Illinois. They defended the rights of the Nazis to actually march. It's one of the most landmark free speech cases in the history of this sort of debate and dialogue. And Ira was Jewish. And he talked about this, and his entire take on this, which is fascinating, I still wrestle with it, it was like 6 years ago, is that he described restrictions, regulations, especially on anything related to content education, as poison gas. And there's no controlling which direction it goes. Tomorrow, that same regulation, that same precedence, because that's how our legal system works, can be used against exactly what you were talking about yesterday. We can, put a specific regulation that you might like on this thing because it protects, let's say, the LGBTQ community. The next administration power, nothing prevents them from using it in that way. What can we as consumers and individuals do on platforms? 80% of all user-generated content on social media platforms is produced by 10% of users. So this goes back to that entire vocal minority piece. It's like we're not even hearing most humans. And so if we're all just passive consumers, then the algorithms are only going to favor
the person who produces. The conversations about information and education can really keep going, but something which has deeply unsettled me about social media, especially recently with the advent of AI, while that's great for specific creatives, that helps them, boost ideas and stuff like that, it can also cause a lot of harm very easily. I came across an ad for a AI video editing app of sorts, and the whole appeal of this app was that it was allowing people to create deep fakes of sort, where you could warp somebody else's face onto any video and it would look like that person was committing that action. The idea that anybody anywhere could lose, autonomy over what is being produced with their face warped on in any situation, not just like a sexual one, but in any other video. The fact that there's no regulation to protect children, individuals, literally anybody from losing that bodily autonomy of themselves is really, really frightening. And I feel like that's something the government should be doing things about. It shouldn't be available to anybody on a random app store.
So let's talk about misinformation. I want to throw out this perspective from our community. It reads, I don't really think misinformation can be subjective. It either is or is not true. It either is or is not a crude spin on a real situation. That comes from Adam Davis in our community. What are your thoughts?
Context of anything is important. So like, even if you make a statement, it could be like true, but you don't include other context around it. How people interpret it could be vastly different. I do think is a positive addition, and is it perfect? No, to something like Twitter right now, that people are able to add context. And that doesn't stop someone from saying something blatantly untrue or whatever. But if they do that, then there is the caveat that like someone might not take the time. But if something's going at mass and someone's like, I should add context, and then there's people hopefully on the back end or whatever that's also checking those things, I think that's a way that things are able to be regulated in a sense, but still allow people the autonomies and freedoms to use these platforms. Anything you do can be also used against you. I think that's true with most cases. When it comes to politics, the way things ideally would be constructed would be as unbiased as they possibly could, understanding that like there will be nuance. Positive potential impacts of those certain sets of rules like outweighs the slight like annoyance or just like temporary inconvenience that like I will experience.
I agree. I think apps as well can add small additional buttons of sort to create that level of like understanding without causing bias. For example, Twitter started this thing where if there's an article in the tweet that you're retweeting or quote tweeting, you have to read the article first. Or like you don't have to really, but it allows you to be like, hey, you didn't click on the article itself before quote tweeting. Do you want to do that? And it's a like reminder from the platform itself that, before you speak, maybe you want to look through it.
Maybe. And the responsibility could also be on like traditional media of like not sensationalizing headlines.
Exactly. What's tricky about what you're saying, Annie, is that I wish it was as black and white as being restricted to post a video with a gun if we deem that as harmful, or bring a pair of tweezers onto an airplane. To me, I think there's so many other harmful effects that come over time. Like, for example, the spike that we've seen in disordered eating amongst young women from having consumed certain types of content online. To me, I don't know how you censor that type of content. So for me, I think it's tricky because I would love to create those rules that would be a slight inconvenience, but really isn't a hindrance on our lives. But how do you do that when radicalization happens over time, or your belief system changes by being re-inculcated time and time again with certain content that you can't really filter out?
I think so much of it is also money, which was brought up earlier. I mean, money, and I don't like that this is true, but so much of just how our world functions comes down to like where money is. And people asked me if Twitter was going to implode, and I said no. Like the amount of investors, the amount of people that like have a financial stake in that platform, like I don't think they will just let this large financial investment just like go up in flames. We can make it so that it isn't financially advantageous to platform certain types of voices or certain types of things.
Platforms prioritize divisive content at times, which reiterates this idea that you're only hearing from the loudest voices in the room. I want to bring us back to TikTok. We touched on it a little bit, but this perspective comes from Angel in our community. And it says, I strongly believe TikTok should be banned in the US. It's hypocritical to say you care about human rights and then go on TikTok, in my opinion. China has so many human rights violations. There's still the genocide of Muslims in China happening that nobody talks about. Do you feel that TikTok essentially symbolizes the human rights violations in China, and by participating on the app, you're kind of condoning that?
China wasn't created by the Chinese government. I'm a Chinese American, I'm Asian American. I will be critical of the Chinese government, and that does not include every single person. Just as I, as like an American, would not want to be lumped in to every American company owner or every American politician. Do not equate me with Jeff Bezos.
I think you could say the same thing like you were saying, Ashley, about like American corporations, because the US also is responsible for many human rights violations in regards to access to water, and also in regards to like treatment of human beings and accessibility to like health. I don't think that we equate that same responsibility and accountability to like Mark Zuckerberg and us using anything meta related. I think it's a very one-dimensional, simplistic view of like a huge issue.
Angel's sort of take on this is interesting, because if you go with that precedence, then you got to give up your iPhone, you got to give up your data, you got to give up everything. I think this is my hot take in general, is I think we live in a world that is so dominated by virtue signaling that, and this is not even from a conservative or liberal perspective. I mean, literally, there's societal incentives to take positions on an issue so that you get social cred. Like, the influencer world never talks about this, and it's part of the reason why I stay away from social media in general. Social media incentivizes you to sell to the masses. Selling to the masses requires you to take positions, not because they're ideologically consistent or just what you believe or they're the values. It's just because you're a weather vane in the wind. It's like, this is the thing right now, so I'm going to go this way. I mean, I remember when 9/11 happened, I was like, I think I was just born 3 years before 9/11. Right after 9/11, there was the Bush administration instituted this thing called the Patriot Act, which is all about privacy regulations. Every freaking liberal that currently is like, we got to ban TikTok, at that time was like, Patriot Act is terrible. Where are people's ideological spines? We ban TikTok, not ban TikTok. We regulate social media, not regulate social media. The fact is, at the end of the day, we're the ones that are clicking the like button. Yes, algorithms dominate, but if we don't take personal responsibility for how we engage, and that is finally why, believe it or not, I've actually jumped back into social media, because it goes this entire take that only 10% of humans are generating 80% of what we see. If we don't get vocal, the people that eat off of social media, like people that are making a living off of social media, are going to continue being driven by incentives that have nothing to do with actual real world implications. The challenge is that we're always incentivized these days to take points of view because we know that that point of view is going to feel this way with a certain group. What can we as people do better?
What's difficult about that though is that I think like everyone who is like on social media as a user consumer like has like that moral inclination to do it, but there's always going to be this underlying but huge tie to like capitalistic incentive. And regardless of like our own moral compasses to like how we want to regulate social media on our own biases and what we believe would be like the best option, there's always going to be that little like invisible hand that's guiding certain things on our algorithms, and like we don't have like the autonomy over that right now.
Well, I want to pause us here. I'm going to bring someone else into the conversation who also has a platform that I think could add some depth to where we're going, but let's keep the conversation going.
Hey, it's Fiona Lynn from the Conversationalist community. Thanks so much for watching our POVz episode on media. The best part about TC is that we want to hear everyone's point of view, including yours. Just text the word media to 1-877-222-1119 to get access to all things TC, and we hope to feature you on a future episode. See you next time.
Like this. Here, I'm holding you like a child.
Abigail, do you want to just take this really quick? This is amazing.